Should you send your child to daycare? If you ask my guest today, she would say absolutely not. Erica Komisar is a clinical social worker, a psychoanalyst, a parent coach, and an author. With 30 years of experience in private practice, she works to alleviate pain from individuals who suffer from depression, anxiety, eating, and other compulsive disorders. By helping them live better lives and have richer, more satisfying relationships, she assists them in achieving their personal and professional goals and living up to their potential. Erica is a psychological consultant bringing parenting and work-life workshops to clinics, schools, corporations, and childcare settings. She's also the author of several books, including Being There, Why Prioritizing Motherhood in the First 3 Years Matters. And she's appeared on major media networks such as CBS, ABC, Fox, and NPR. She's a regular contributor to the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, New York Daily News, and Fox 5 NY. I first discovered Erica's work on Instagram through a podcast interview clip that I came across in my feed. She was talking about the emotional effects of sending infants to daycare, and I just knew I had to have her on the show. In this conversation, we're talking all about parenting and childhood mental illness. I asked her questions about daycare specifically and what we can do as working parents to nurture our children and raise them well, and what we can do as moms and dads to ensure the health and mental well-beings of our kids. If you're a parent or thinking about becoming a parent one day, this episode is a must. Please listen in. It's going to blow your mind. Erica, welcome to the Trust Issues podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so I want to dive right in with you. And I recently just watched I've been following you for quite a while, but I watched your lecture that you did and read the research paper that you published in ARC, which I personally think every single parent, every single individual thinking about becoming a parent needs to watch themselves. It was so moving, and it quite honestly brought me to tears multiple times. I'm a mom of a toddler, and I have another little boy on the way. And so you said in that lecture that children are not born resilient. You know, we hear this all the time, that kids are resilient, but you say they're not, and that they're actually born neurologically and emotionally fragile, and their needs need to be met. And if they are to become mentally healthy and responsible adults. And you also found that ages 0 to 3 is this really critical period of brain development, and that mothers serve a very unique biological function in this period, because their physical and emotional presence helps to regulate the child's emotions from moment to moment. So myself, as I said, a mother of a toddler boy and another on the way, I wholeheartedly agree. I can see how my son, he's 2, just turned 2. He needs me physically present. You know, I can see that he's constantly looking to me to help him feel safe and secure. Yet so many parents spend so much time away from their children. So can you talk to me about what the research says regarding the emotional effects on infants, on these young children who are separated from their mothers, whether it be that they're going to daycare or they have another caregiver that's their primary caregiver for the majority of their days within their first 3 years of their life? What does the research say about this?
Well, we know that attachment security is the foundation for mental health. And that's in all of the research. And so what we're trying to create is healthy attachment in our children. And attachment security is not something that you achieve in the first few days or few weeks or even few months of a child's life. It requires being physically and emotionally present enough in the first 3 years to keep reinforcing that your child's safe over and over and over again. So the idea is that, you know, children are not born resilient, but they're born with the capacity to learn resilience. They're born with the sort of receptivity, sort of the receptiveness of saying, give me that sense of trust and give me that sense of safety in the world, and I can become resilient. But they're not born resilient. So that's the myth. The myth is that you can do anything to babies and they're rubber and you can drop them and they'll bounce. And it's just a myth, because babies, in fact, by the end of 3 years, 85% of a child's right brain is developed. That means that's pretty much most of their social emotional brain. And a mother or a primary attachment figure or the go-to person in the world for them, who provides them with a sense of safety and security, is the person who has the most influence over them in those first 3 years, or what we call a critical window of brain development, to make them feel safe and secure. You layer on that safety, adversity, frustration, all the things in life that we will face and that we have to face, disappointment, rejection, loss. You layer it on top. And if the foundation of that child is emotional security and attachment security, then that child has a greater chance of being able to cope with stress and adversity in the future, but also that process of mothers from moment to moment soothing babies when they're in distress is the process of emotional regulation. It sort of brings the baby down and up. And, when babies are born, they're sort of born in very emotionally volatile states. And if you ever doubt this, just look at a baby. They can go from 0 to 60 in 3 seconds with their frustration, with their anger, with their sadness. And parents go, what did I do? How did that happen? It happened so quickly. 1 minute they were fine and the next minute they weren't. That's normal for babies because they're not born with that ability. We teach them that ability. We teach them by being emotionally regulated ourselves, but really by being emotionally present so we can do that moment to moment regulation for them. Again, every time you soothe the baby, you're actually performing a biological function for that baby. It feels like an instinctual emotional function for most mothers, but it's actually also a biological function.
And what about when we're told that we need to help a baby self-soothe? This is a big thing that is a conversation, I think, in my generation. And I mean, I think also in my parents' generation. My son, from the time that he was little, he was always sleeping right next to me, and he's always been right next to me. And anytime he needed to be soothed, it felt very natural for me to soothe him. But, there's the conversation around, well, you're going to spoil a baby and you need to teach your baby to self-soothe. What does the research say about that?
So the concept of being able to soothe ourselves, babies aren't capable of soothing themselves until after that 3 year period. That doesn't mean that there aren't moments when a baby might be fine. It doesn't mean that there aren't moments when a baby is kind of what I call kvetchy, sort of crying like, "Meh, meh, meh," in the bassinet in the crib, and and the idea is that you don't need to run to a baby when they are complaining. But you do need to run to a baby when they're in distress. And that's the misunderstanding. So it's a lot of misunderstandings, I think. A lot of myths, a lot of misunderstandings based on this principle that babies are born self-sufficient and independent and capable of emotional regulation and resilient. It's sort of like the fantasy that parents have that their babies don't need them. And I think it's because at some point in history, probably 4 generations ago, probably right around the time of the women's movement, women wanted to be free of the burden of raising children. So they created a myth that children don't need you. Gloria Steinem created that myth. She literally came out and said to women, babies don't need you, just go out to work. Society needs you to make money. Society needs you to be part of the GDP. You're a failure as part of this movement unless you go out to work. So that created this. It was the beginning of creating a narrative that mothers are unnecessary at home. Mothering is unnecessary. It's unimportant work. Anybody can do it. And babies don't need anything. Sort of like treating babies as if they were self-cleaning ovens. And so sleep training and all of that came out of this narrative. It didn't exist years ago. It's really just 4 generations, from that, and again, we all benefited from the women's rights movement. So we don't want to, throw the baby out with the bathwater, no pun intended. But, you have to look at it and say, in what world did they look at a neurologically fragile baby? And now they have mothers looking at their babies that way. So it's really interesting how you can weave a web of lies and myth, and you can get people to believe it. I mean, I guess we live in a society that happens now all the time, but the idea that we can tell people something that's not true and tell it over and over again and put it on social media and then people believe it. And the truth is that this is just an out and out lie. Babies are neurologically and emotionally fragile. They need their primary attachment figure. If you're going to lay down that foundation, and if you put them in daycare or put them with strangers or treat them like a sack of potatoes, nothing good comes from that in terms of their long-term mental health.
Hmm. I mean, I'm very fortunate that I work from home. I work from home. I don't have to send my children to daycare. I knew the moment that I became pregnant that I would never want to do that. That was not for me. That was not for us. And then
Right.
I learned of you. I learned of your work, and I learned of actually, the detrimental effects of what doing that actually, can it put on a child, and during especially those specifically very fragile years. So can you talk about, especially for those who feel and say, I don't have a choice, I have to leave, I have to go to work. Is there something they can do? What are your alternatives? I loved, again, I think I'm gonna keep referring back to that lecture because I think it's really the foundation for so much of your work. But what can someone do who is maybe currently has their child right now in daycare? What are alternatives do they have? What
Right.
do they
So one thing I advocate for, and every woman in America should be advocating for it, and I don't understand why women are advocating for daycare and not advocating for paid maternity leave. I mean, like, in what world do we want to be advocating for some stranger to take care of our newborn infants when we want to be home with them? I mean, over 60% of women would stay home with their children if they had some support in the first year. And I think it's in Flint, Michigan, they give mothers $500 a month. I mean, it's not a lot of money, but in the first year of a baby's life, they give mothers $500. I think it's even more. They give them $1,000 on the birth, $1,500 on the birth, and $500 a month. And even that allows mothers to make choices that very poor mothers, that they might not, it might help to pay their rent, might be half of their rent in certain parts of the country. So, we have to put our money where our mouth is and say that, our tax dollars are well spent by giving to mothers who stay home with their babies for the first year and then have flexible work arrangements for the next 2 years. The other thing is, if you have a job that doesn't allow you to bring your baby with you, or doesn't allow you to do it flexibly from home, maybe try to get one.
Mm,
Seek work that you can either do from home or that you can take your baby with you. In other parts of the world, mothers run stores in India, and they have their babies with them. Mothers run weaving cooperatives, and all the mothers have their babies with them. So the idea of leaving our babies behind is a very bizarre thing in other parts of the world. People just don't do that unless they're following our Western model and they're going to offices. But, so one thing is, work from home, work flexibly. The other thing I would say is the next best thing to being there for your baby is to have kinship bonds take care of your baby. A grandmother, an aunt, a next door neighbor who you call aunt, who's going to have a similar kind of investment in that baby's life forever as you do. Not the same, but more similar. A spouse, that would be kinship bonds. The next best thing would be to get a single surrogate caregiver, a nanny or a babysitter who's very nurturing and sensitive and empathic. But again, you don't want to lean too heavily into that because you are still leaving your baby for many hours. And then if you can't afford a babysitter, you share a caregiver like they do in California, where you share a nanny, and that makes it more cost effective.
mhm.
So, daycare is not cheap. It's expensive. So if you're going to pay that much for daycare, share a caregiver with another family, and now you've reduced the adult to child ratio. Because you'd say daycare. One of the things that makes daycare so toxic for children is that the ratios of child to adult are so poor. The only thing that makes it cost effective is a 5-to-1 ratio, meaning 5 children under the age of 3 to 1 caregiver, 8-to-1 sometimes in Sweden, 12-to-1. And there's always caregivers in daycare centers that are absent. And so that makes the number of children per caregiver even greater, And so you have this kind of rotating cycle of transient daycare workers who probably don't stay very long because it's such a stressful job. I mean, to have to take care of and soothe and regulate the emotions of 5, 8, 12 babies under the age of 3, you might as well lose your mind. So these people don't stay very long. So you have this rotating door. So basically what you're doing is putting your child in a very stressful environment.
Mhm.
A stressful environment, an environment where they don't have the center of their universe, which gives them a sense of peace and safety and security, which is you. So, mothers are so quick to say, I don't matter. I mean, do you really want to believe as mothers that you don't matter? I mean, it's so interesting to me that mothers want to believe that they're fungible. They want to believe that they're sort of interchangeable with other people until they come home, and then they want the baby to see them as special. And you can't have it both ways, because if you put your child in daycare, they're more likely to be stressed. They're more likely to develop attachment disorders. They're more likely to have indiscriminate attachment to strangers and not be exclusively attached to you, which is what we want to see. And so, be careful of what you wish for, because you may get it. Then you end up with a child with an attachment disorder that leads more likely to mental illness later on.
Mm. There's so much to unpack here. I will say that, growing up, my mom, she's an immigrant. She came here to the States, had me and my younger brother. And in order to keep us home, I ended up being homeschooled until I was eighth grade, in eighth grade. And my mom was always my primary caregiver. So if anyone's listening and they need an idea, what she did was she got some families in the neighborhood and said, you can bring your kids to my house. I'll watch them. You pay me, whatever you can. And that was a way in which she was able to stay home with us. And then she would also take a few days a week a night shift at a local factory. And that was how she was able to, there was always one of my parents, either my mother during the day or my father at night. And you talk so much about sacrifice. And I love when you talk about that, because parenting is sacrifice. Deciding to bring children into the world is deciding to make sacrifices again and again and again. And I think so many people in our society, we're pacified and we're told that, and it's what you talk about, that we're catering to the parents instead of catering to the children. And what that's doing is, I would love for you to talk about what that is doing, because I think, like, as we've seen this mental health epidemic that's happening within our children, within our young adults. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, I mean, not only are we catering to parents, but, in freeing ourselves from the chains of being in a patriarchal society as women, we bought into the patriarchal model and became patriarchs ourselves. I mean, we created workplaces and work in workplaces that are male-dominated workplaces, or workplaces that have male-dominated ethics and values. So why don't we bring our children to work? I mean, some jobs it would be impossible. You're not going to be a firewoman, firewoman, and bring your child to work. But, in other parts of the world, people bring their children to work because you'd say it's a more, I mean, listen, if you go to travel at all with your children and you go to other parts of the world, particularly in Latin America, if they see a family with young children, they call you over and they bring you to the head of the line. It's much more child-loving, child-friendly, right? We don't do that here. We don't care about children here. But the idea is, why do we have to leave our children behind to go to a job? Why aren't there environments where we can bring our children? Because we wanted to be like men, so we fit into this patriarchal society. I mean, that's the irony, right? We swung from being oppressed by the patriarchy to being the patriarchy and acting like men and leaving our children behind and not caring for our children. So, I mean, something really went wrong in the translation of what it meant to be free. Being free is having a choice. You should have a choice whether you want children or not. But as Penelope Leach said many years before me, don't have children if you don't want to care for your own children.
Mm.
Okay, because children need caring. Now, does that mean that you can't work? No, that's not what it's not what my book says. It's not what I say. It's not what I did, right? I mean, but your work has to be the frosting, and the cake has to be your children when they're in that 3-year period. And I'm going to say, and this is, the truth, your children have to be the cake for the 18 years that they're with you.
Yeah.
Because the truth is, when they leave you at 18, in our country, they leave at 18. In other countries, they don't leave till 24 or until they get married. In Italy and Spain. But in our country, they leave at 18 to go to school or to go get a job or move out or whatever. When they're 18, you're free again. You're going to have a lifetime of being free. And, those years, you don't want to make your job the cake and your children the frosting. You want to make your job the frosting and your children the cake. And if you don't do that, then there are consequences. And the consequences are your children are more likely, one, to have mental health issues, and two, not to like you later and want to spend much time with you.
Wow. That is something my husband and I talk about all the time. It's like we want to raise children that when they're older, they can't wait to hang out with their parents and bring
They
their
want to know you.
they
Yeah.
want to know us and they want to bring their girlfriends over.
Yeah.
You know, as a mom of two boys, soon to be two boys, I want my boys to want to bring their friends over to our house. And, you know, you recently wrote an article that was published in the Institute of Family Studies about the responsibility that parents have for their children's mental health. I think it's a perfect segue. You wrote, many parents can't see how their own behavior, parenting style, or mental health issues may be impacting their children's mental stability. So do you believe that parents are the root cause of this epidemic of mental
Yes.
illness? Can you talk about this?
Yes, I do. Well, parents, it makes parents sound like the villains, but the way we're parenting our children. I mean, the two biggest influences are one, the way we're parenting our children, and two, the other influences in society, particularly in adolescence, that we have let get out of control. Things like technology and social media and the pressures that we allow schools to impose on our children and the pressures that we also buy into. There's many things in society. You know, I mean, there's other things too. There's fears about the future and global warming, and it's a pretty scary world. But again, I just consider those adversities. We always had adversities. In my generation, we were living in the shadow of the Cold War, nuclear war. I was born in the 60s. So, you know, we had Vietnam, we had terrible, scary things, nuclear war, nuclear holocaust. You know, I don't think we've ever not had scary things. Is climate change more scary than nuclear war and nuclear meltdown? We had 3 Mile Island. Not really. Not really. It's that our children are more fragile. So, and one of the things I've said on other interviews, and I really stand by, is that we we treat our younger children in a way as if they're much older than they are, as if they can handle more than they can. And then they get a little older, and then we hover and treat them as if they're babies. I mean, it's so confusing to me because we were supposed to treat babies, as completely dependent, completely neurologically fragile, completely in need of nurturing. And then as they started to get older, introduce the idea of disappointment and rejection, and that's what builds resilience. So you have to build resilience on a bed of security. If you try to build resilience on a bed of insecurity, then it's like a house of cards that will fall apart the first adversity that comes their way.
What can parents look out for as they are raising these children? Signs of mental illness. What can we do about it? What can we do to mitigate that?
In all of my books, in my writing, I write a lot about science, but certainly there's a whole chapter about science. So I don't want to give it short shrift, but I would say look at the books that I've written. But
And we'll definitely link all your books
yeah,
in the show notes.
yeah. But I mean, some of the signs in younger children are the fight or flight. So either aggression and behavioral problems, which is the fight part of our evolutionary response to stress. Or the flight part, which is distractibility. So all these kids being diagnosed, half of them, most of them boys, are being diagnosed with ADHD.
Right.
Guess what? It's not normal for half of the children in America to have ADHD. So that's just wrong. It's just not what's happening. What is happening is we're stressing our kids out by raising them in such a way that we're not there for them in the early years, and then putting them into these stressful environments that are more and more cognitively based learning at an early age. So we want to be careful that we don't put them into these, left brain oriented learning places as opposed to play based schools. So particularly in the early years, first of all, children don't need to be in school before the age of 3. They're not even playing with each other before the age of 3. They're only doing something called parallel play before 3, so they're not even interacting. You're not putting them in school for them. You're putting them in school for you, so you can be rid of the burden of them. Children don't need to be in school, and anything before 3 is daycare. 3 to 5 is what we in this country call preschool. We used to call it nursery school, and that's meant to be minimal at 3, maybe 3 days a week, a couple hours a day, just to introduce them to the idea of separation. And then at 4, most preschools are 5 hours a day, 5 days a week, to prepare them for kindergarten. And now, 50 years ago, kindergarten was only till 12 o'clock. It was 9 to 12, 5 days a week. Because it was
Wow.
garden of children, kindergarten, garden of children. It was play-based, wasn't cognitive-based, and it was just helping kids to learn to be in a room together and play together. And so now kindergarten is 8:15 to 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all for the grown-ups in the room. It's so you can work or be away from your children. It's not for the kids. And whatever anybody tells you about it being for the kids is a lie. It's not for the kids, because what the kids need, probably 0 to 5, is they need a minimal amount of social interaction with other kids. They need to go to the playground. They need to interact with siblings. They need to interact with neighbors. They need to have friends. But it's not in the way that we've structured it. It's not. They don't need school as intensely as we think about school. So, yeah, I mean, we're really failing our children. We really are. And the world has become a very adult place in the sense that adults think about themselves.
Yeah.
They don't want to make the sacrifices. They're very self-focused. They're very self-determined, very self-sufficient. It's all about self. And the truth is, having a family is not about self. Having a family is about them. It should be.
It should be. You talked about this in a recent interview you did about how school specifically, I mean, now that we're on the school conversation, is feminizing boys and traumatizing girls. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that and what can parents do? What different approach can we take? Because obviously, as you're speaking to, preschool and kindergarten, all these things and how they're structured in America today, it is
Yeah.
is what you do. So, can you talk about the harms that they're causing, but then what should we do instead? What should the parent who's listening right now opt for that would be different to nurture their child instead of put them in this environment that's creating harm?
Well, the boys are more neurologically fragile than girls. There are more boys born in the world, but more girls survive. The
Wow.
mortality rates of boys are higher than for girls, but yet the birth rates are higher for boys because boys are both physically and neurologically more fragile than girls. So more of them die in other parts of the world. But what we do know is that boys respond to stress more intensely than girls do. They're more fragile even than girls. And so what we're seeing is by putting boys into an environment, boys and girls are meant to learn experientially through play, nature-based, by physically moving their bodies. They're actually meant to learn through physical movement. And so what do? We do the exact opposite of what they need. We put them at a very young age and younger. So like they're calling 14 months school, 18 months school in other parts of the world. And even here now. So we're putting them in these quiet, contained learning environments where they must sit quietly and learn letters and learn numbers and learn colors and learn days of the week and listen to people reading books. And little boys go nuts. Their brains are on fire. They're like, this is not what I'm meant to be doing. So they get up and they run around. And then they're labeled as having attention deficit disorder. I'm like, no, they don't have attention deficit disorder. They're doing what little boys are meant to do, which is they're physically playing to learn. You're restraining them and they can't be restrained. Now, if you keep restraining them, then they get stressed.
Yeah.
And you label them and you tell them there's something wrong with them, and now they're stressed. And you punish them, and now they're stressed. And now you have a little boy who's developed a mental disorder, maybe depression, maybe anxiety, about not being able to control his body, because little boys who are 2 and 3 and even 4 years old are not meant to control their bodies in the way that we're requiring them to. So we're creating the problem. I mean, we are creating the problem from the beginning straight through. We are creating the problem.
Hmm. Just heartbreaking. As a mom
Mm.
of two boys, I just, that could bring me to tears. Thank you for sharing that. I think the alternative, one question, one more question I have around this, because I do have a lot of listeners who are parents who are trying to create more awareness around topics like this. And they are doing things to work from home. I have a very large entrepreneurial audience. But I think when you're home with your child, and I'm home with my son every single day. My husband also works from home, so we tag team. And sitting down and working on your computer while your son is there, that's, my son is there, it's impossible, it's not going to happen. And I don't even
Right.
attempt to do it because he needs my attention in that moment, and I don't want to create that environment where I'm with him but I'm not. So
Right.
what can a parent do who is working from home, who needs to get things done? Especially, I think, the pandemic created quite a large shift in how many people do work from home now. What can parents who are now, either they do work from home or now they want to work from home, what can they do to foster that within their children, their play and all of those things, while
So
not
one,
being
yeah,
away?
one thing is that if you have your spouse home, then you create a co-working environment where you say, listen, women in the developing world do this all the time. They wear their babies on their bodies for the first year until they can't wear them anymore. They start by wearing them on the front. Then they get too heavy. They wear them on the back. Then when they really get too heavy and they start walking and wanting to squirm around and become toddlers, they take them with them as long as they can. But sometimes it's dangerous to take them with them, or they can't take them with them, or it's too far. They need to walk to take them with them. So they'll tag team with another mother. They'll say, okay, you watch my child for 2 or 3 hours while I go pick the potatoes. I'll be back and then I'll watch your children so you can go pick the potatoes. Now, what would the equivalent of that be? That you have another mother or two in the neighborhood and you create co-working spaces where you
Mm,
say, okay, we all have desk jobs, we're all working from home and we're all entrepreneurial. So why don't we work from one house? Each day we'll work from a different house because nobody has desktops, we all have laptops. And you take care of my kids in one room, your playroom, while I'm working in the other room, and I'm proximate. So if my baby's in distress, I can be there for my baby. I can drop everything and go to my baby. And then we'll switch. I'll do an hour, you do an hour, and then you do an hour, and then we'll switch again. We'll all have lunch together, and then so think about the idea of co-working spaces with mothers. There are organizations which organize mothers around the country and around the world. There's one called Big Ocean Women, which organizes women. But the idea that women don't really band together in this country. If we did, if we banded together, do you know we would have a paid maternity leave? But because we don't get each other's backs, and we've created this divide between working mothers and non-working mothers. We've created a divide, and like everything, it's become binary in this country. So women who should be supporting each other and saying, whether you choose to work or not, it doesn't matter. All of us should agree that it's best for mothers to have the choice to be with their babies. Let's all band together and say that, and say we're all going to go on strike and not go to work until this country gives us a paid maternity leave. Wouldn't that be great if every woman in America went on strike or went on sex strike and said, we're not giving you men any sex, not one bit. I think that was Lysistrata. Wasn't that Lysistrata? I'm trying to think the Greek tragedy
yeah,
where the women said, we're not giving you sex until you listen to us.
yeah, yeah,
Every woman goes on strike in America until there's a paid leave. But that's not happening because women can't agree
it's true.
on a basic thing, which is mothers and babies deserve to have the chance to be together for at least a year, if not up to 3 years. And that should be every mother's choice.
Wow.
And that should be every baby's right.
Ugh. Last question for you, Erica. This has been fantastic. What do you wish more moms and dads knew about parenting their children, their young children in those formative years?
That the most important thing is not a car or a vacation to Disney World or a nicer house or nice clothes or a private school. The best thing that you can give your child is your physical and emotional presence. And if that means that you have only one car or take public transportation, if that means you live in a rental apartment instead of own a home until your children are older, if that means that you don't go on vacations for a few years, but you go, for day trips to the beach, that's what your children need. They don't need any more material things. They don't need toys. They don't need Disney World. They need you.
Wow. Erica, where can everyone connect with you online?
www.komisar, Komisar.com. And you can buy my books there. You can see the things I write there. You can contact me there. But also, I'm on Erica Komisar CSW. I'm on Twitter and Instagram. So all of those places.
And we'll be sure to link all of those.
Yeah.
Thank you for the work you're doing in the world. I truly believe it is absolutely necessary. I know that you know that too, but I cannot wait to share this message out to our audience because everyone needs to hear it. So thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Wow, that episode, it absolutely blew my mind. It brought me to tears. And isn't Erica just absolutely amazing? I hope this episode gave you food for thought. Whether you are a parent, you're a mother to be, or you're dreaming of the day that you have little ones. I am so grateful Erica came. She brought her wisdom to the show and really was able to bring so much research and thoughtful conversation to the Trust Issues podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcast. It would help us get our message to more parents and mothers worldwide. Reviews help us get more incredible guests like Erica on the show. So rate and review, and I'll see you next time.